Hello and welcome to Real Life Church. My name is Ryan.
And I'm Stacy, and we're so excited that you're here with us today.
And we're here to tell you about a couple of things happening in the life of the church coming up. One of those things is important. If you're going to join us in person, June 9th, we are going to be switching to 2 service times. So we're going to be doing 9 and 10:30 a.m. So come join us. Otherwise, join us online 10 a.m. like normal.
And then we are so excited. Summer is here. We're going to shift service times a little bit, but we're also getting ready for our big mega party for kids, which we call VBS. If you know someone that's going to be in kindergarten all the way up through and past college that would like to be a part of VBS, you can go to reallife.la/VBS to sign up either as a camper or as someone that's going to help. And you don't even have to really like kids. You just have to love kids because there are lots of behind the scenes things that you can do to support this event. So that's going to happen in July. Go ahead and go to that website to check out more information. And church, we just want to say thank you so much for how incredibly generous you are. You make events like VBS possible for kids to discover who Jesus is for the very first time. It's also a monumental shift for students to be able to serve in an exciting, amazing way. And the grown-ups like being around here a bunch too. So thank you so much for being the church. If you ever have questions about giving, you can always go to reallife.la/give. Those are the things. And now we are going to throw to Pastor Jim. We'll see you right here.
Hey, Real Life Church, it's Pastor Jim. Good to be with you again. Had a great experience at our pantry this last weekend. As you know, we give out groceries twice a month. About 1,000 people a month are fed through our pantry. And there have been people in the neighborhood near our church walking over and visiting and picking up groceries on foot. And this last week, a woman came over and speaking no English, but speaking Chinese. And we have a person who's volunteering in our pantry who speaks Chinese. And she stopped and conversed a little bit when she came over to pick up groceries. And out of the blue, she said, well, you know, I'd like to become a Christian. I don't know how. And so we led her in a prayer, and she repeated the prayer and seemed very touched by it and decided right then and there on the spot she wanted to follow Jesus. And now she's signed up for an English class we're going to teach here at the church to help some of our new neighbors assimilate into the world around us. So anyway, good news in the life of the church as people are continuing to step over that line and decide to follow Jesus. And it was just such a shock to hear her say out of the blue, okay, I'm ready to become a Christian. How do I do it? If you were asked that question, would you be ready? Would you know how to answer on the spot? How do I become a Christian? Anyway, good news in the life of the church. So today we're going to dive back into our series. This is the last in our long series on the Sermon on the Mount. We went through Matthew chapters 5, 6, and 7. Today we're rounding it out with the very end of chapter 7 and looking at this beautiful call to live into God's kingdom. Jesus has laid out his vision for his kingdom on the earth. And what I hope this series has done for you is it's like this. When you're walking through a living room or a den that you've been in before and you know where all the furniture is, so you kind of glide around it without thinking about it. And one day somebody moves a coffee table just an inch to the left and you walk through not thinking about it. And because it's in a different place, you don't register the fact that it's slightly off from where you're used to seeing it. And you hit your pinky toe on that coffee table, and you fall to the ground writhing like you're suffering from some kind of medieval torture because it's got you at just the right spot. I hope that this series has moved the Sermon on the Mount just a little bit for you, so it's caught you off guard and made you stub your toe. I hope that if you've settled into some of these teachings of Jesus because you've heard them before, because they're familiar and said, yeah, I know those. I hope focusing in on these has moved them so that you can't quite get around them and ignore them. Not that I want you to stub your toe, but that I want us to again live into these teachings and realize Jesus is teaching something powerful and radical and otherworldly. And it shouldn't be something that we casually glide around without noticing it. Today, he's going to revisit the theme he's been on here at the end in the last couple of weeks of calling us to really make a decision about what we're going to do with these teachings. As we dive into the scriptures together, let's pray. Jesus, thank you for this vision for a new world and life with you. Call us to live into your kingdom. Help us to let go of this world and the kingdoms that we have clung to and take hold wholly of you. And may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be pleasing in your sight. Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. All right, here's the Sermon on the Mount. Here's the lay of the land, everything we've covered. He begins with what are called the Beatitudes, the blessings, in which he describes how life in the world leaves us mourning and meek and thirsting for righteousness. It leaves us broken and empty-hearted. And he says, if that's you, yours is the kingdom of heaven. Come and join my kingdom, and you'll be filled. Your thirst for righteousness will be quenched. If you've been left poor by this world, I will take care of you. Come and join my kingdom. That's the preface to the Sermon on the Mount. And then he begins laying out what the laws of his kingdom look like in contrast to the Jewish laws that they all knew, the laws of Moses. And he says, in the law of Moses, you were told don't murder. But in my kingdom, we're not even going to hold on to anger towards one another. You've been told don't commit adultery, but in my kingdom, we're not even going to look at other people like they're an object. You've been told love your neighbor and hate your enemy, but I tell you, in my kingdom, we're going to love our enemies. He lays out this beautiful, powerful, radical vision for life in the kingdom. And the end of Matthew chapter 5 are these overwhelming challenges. Love your enemy, pray for those who persecute you, turn the other cheek to one who slaps you. If somebody sues you for your coat, give them a shirt too. If they tell you to walk 1 mile, walk two with them. So let go of this world that you're no longer seeking revenge or compensation. That's the call to the kingdom. And then in Matthew chapter 6, he gets into the spiritual disciplines of life in the kingdom. And it's the three when yous. When you give, when you pray, when you fast. And Matthew chapter 6 goes into those three things. When you give generously, give sacrificially. When you pray, here's the Lord's Prayer. Here's how to pray. And it's a prayer for the kingdom. And when you fast, don't call attention to yourself, do so in humility. These are the spiritual disciplines of life in the kingdom. And then he reprises some of the Lord's Prayer. He says, now, as I said, forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And he goes back and he visits it again and he says, because if you don't forgive people, you're not going to be forgiven. Forgiveness is key in our kingdom. And then, as he's told us, give us this day our daily bread, he goes back to that and he says, so don't worry about your food or your clothes. Let God take care of you. God will give you everything you need in this world. Live into his kingdom. Let go of the kingdoms of this world. Trust him. And then, beginning of chapter 7, don't judge other people. Right? You've been given great grace, so don't judge. And then he comes to this concluding section that we've been in the last 2 weeks and now today, where he says, life is a fork in the road, and one pathway leads to a big mess, and a lot of people go that way. One pathway leads to destruction. Narrow is the road to life, but choose life. Choose life with me. That's life in the kingdom. Some people, he says, will stand there and say, go the wrong way. And those are false prophets, and you have to watch out for them. By their fruit, you'll know them. So watch out for them. You need to choose the road that leads to life. And now he's going to conclude by saying, those who choose the road that leads to life have made a good choice that'll get them through the storms of life. This sermon has been a catalyst that has caused people to leave their jobs and to sell all they have and to completely change their lifestyle, to build churches, to take the gospel to foreign nations, to completely change their identity. It should never be a piece of furniture that we just glide around because we've seen it too many times. This is an invitation to a radical and otherworldly kind of life. And this is how Jesus rounds it out in Matthew chapter 7 at verse 24. Listen to God's word. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house. Yet it did not fall, because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house. and it fell with a great crash. When Jesus had finished saying these things, the crowds were amazed at his teaching, because he taught as one who had authority and not as their teachers of the law. There are a lot of people whose lives end up in a wreck when faced with challenges because the foundation isn't solid. I remember there was this road that I used to drive down on the way to work down in the south end of Los Angeles County, and there was this road that underneath somebody years before had set off some dynamite, and it had caused a layer of underground clay to slide. And so this road every year would get more and more damaged until the county would go out and lay new road. They spent millions of dollars constantly replacing this road because the road was always slipping towards the ocean. And the reason it was doing it was because the foundation wasn't solid. And if you and I don't base our lives on something solid, it will constantly be in drift towards the ocean. And Jesus says, here, I've laid out the principles of this new kingdom. Live into my kingdom. Base your life on my teachings, and you will be like somebody who was smart enough to build their house on a solid foundation. We've been tested recently. Our foundations have been tested. The pandemic shook our world, and it tested whether or not we really stood for what we believed in. It tested whether or not we could really sleep well at night knowing the world was in chaos because God was as in control as we had been saying he was. And it was hard for everybody. There was no one for whom that experience was easy. But Jesus calls us to build our lives on a strong foundation so that when the world shakes, we stand strong. Let's look at the ethical, intellectual, and relational foundations that Jesus lays for us in the Sermon on the Mount and in all of his teachings in life. There are some foundations in the American culture that we have come to depend on and take for granted. They come from Jesus, but we often forget their source and we assume it's just how life is. For instance, the one place that the Christian culture and the modern secular culture connect is on the subject of ethics. Because even though in the secular culture they may not believe in a God, they are passionately committed to the fact that there are some moral truths that need to be upheld. Where the source of those is becomes a question. For we who follow Jesus, we know the source of our moral values. But everybody feels the intuition, everybody feels the tug that there need to be moral values out there, that moral values ought to count. This is where C.S. Lewis starts off his book, Mere Christianity. He starts off by saying, when people argue, you can hear that they're both appealing to moral foundations that they expect the other person to know about. I gave you a bit of my orange, now you give me a bit of yours. It's only fair. And he says it's very rare that someone will say, well, I just don't care about fairness. Fairness doesn't apply to me. Usually we try to find some exception to the moral rule that lets us off the hook, but both of us seem to understand that there are moral laws that everyone can appeal to and which should apply to everyone. If you believe in Jesus, you have a foundation for those morals. But if you don't believe in Jesus, where those morals come from is kind of up for grabs. The great German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche 100 years ago observed that with the loss of theology in the Western world, Christian ethics is going to go with it. And this whole ethic that everybody deserves dignity and we should care especially for those who are in most need, Nietzsche had nothing to do with it. He didn't like Christianity because he said it preserved the weak. There's actually a contemporary philosopher in Australia, I believe, named David Benatar. And Benatar has come up with a new philosophy which he calls antinatalism. That means against birth. And his argument is that life is filled with so much suffering that it seems like a terrible decision to bring more life into existence, so people should stop having babies. Just let the species die out so there'll be less suffering. Right? It sounds absurd. But without Jesus, the moral foundations are up for grabs. Without Jesus, you and I are a long accidental process that we came out of a long accidental process that had no intention for us, where there was never really anything of deep value underlying it. It's all just an accident. The universe exploded into existence some 15 billion years ago, and it was an accident. We don't know how, we don't know why, it just did. Life emerged out of the inanimate. We don't know how, we don't know why, it just did. And eventually that life mutated and changed over time until it got to be you and I walking around thinking that life is valuable and feeling purposeful. But if there is no God behind it, all those feelings are just a joke. And our sense that there should be deep moral rights and wrongs in the world, that's just a mistaken instinct of evolution, which can be done away with. The only real ethic we could be left with is tribalism, where I care very much about myself and my own survival, and maybe I feel empathy for the people I'm closest to, my family or my kin, but outside of my tribe, who cares? Outside of my tribe, why should I honor anyone else's dignity? And that is a truly secular ethic. That's the only ethic you're left with without God. With Jesus, every single human being was designed by God to be a creature capable of receiving and giving love. And every human being deserves a deep dignity and respect. With Jesus, you have that. And he undergirds the deepest moral instincts that we feel, the morals that we desire to have in our society. Look at the thing that now today in modern American society is seen as one of the most grievous ills of history. Look at slavery. Listen to the appeals of Martin Luther King Jr. and Frederick Douglass and Harriet Beecher Stowe, who appealed intentionally and directly to Christians to say, look, if you have read the teachings of Jesus, you know this is wrong. You know that slavery is wrong. You know that racism is wrong. And you can't consistently follow the teachings of Jesus and hold to such evil practices. They could appeal to the teachings of Jesus because Jesus' teachings and his identity undergird a deep and rich morality. In fact, if you look at the history of Europe, a lot of slavery was stamped out by followers of Jesus. Slavery was rich in the ancient world. It was practiced in the Greco-Roman culture and the Babylonian culture and the Assyrian culture and actually all over the world. And it was not until the Middle Ages when followers of Jesus started decrying slavery that it anywhere was stamped out. St. Patrick, whom we celebrate on St. Patrick's Day, wrote articulately against the practice of slavery in the 4th or 5th century. By the 9th century, the Christians in Europe, in Italy and France, wrote a contract, in 1840 this was, wrote a contract agreeing that they would not sell slaves into the Muslim slave trade, which was thriving at the time. The primary drive against slavery throughout the history of the world has come from followers of Jesus, because otherwise it has been widely practiced. I don't have a good enough imagination to figure out what the world would have looked like if Jesus had never walked the earth, if he had never taught the things that he taught, if the Sermon on the Mount did not exist. But I have the feeling it would be rather hellish. There are no other religions or philosophies that teach what Jesus taught. Love your enemy. Do good to those who persecute you. Be generous to those who are in need. Be generous to the people who steal from you. And treat other people the way you would want to be treated. The golden rule is what rounds out the ethical teachings on the Sermon on the Mount. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And because of Jesus' teaching that undergirds our morals, we can stand against great evils like slavery. But without Jesus, you have tribalism, and might makes right, and group will. In addition to undergirding the morality that we so crave, Jesus undergirds the intellectual foundations of the modern world. Wisdom is the ability to synthesize our past experiences in order to make healthy and productive choices in the future. And the more we make healthy and productive choices in the future based on what we have learned from our past, the more wise we are considered. And the Bible is a book of wisdom. It is a book that lauds wisdom. The book of Proverbs celebrates wisdom and decries folly. The wisdom of figures like Moses and Solomon are celebrated in the scriptures. The Sermon on the Mount itself right here concludes praising the wisdom of Jesus as one who taught with authority, unlike the teachers of the law. And then the rest of the New Testament is filled with letters from the disciples and people like Paul, giving wisdom to the churches of how best to go about life and ministry. The Bible is a book of wisdom that celebrates wisdom, that creates wisdom. Because we are a people of the book, we are a literate people. Very early on, Jewish people and Christians intentionally focused on learning to read and to write. That was not necessarily common throughout the ancient world, and so because they were a people of the book, they went into other cultures and created written languages so the scriptures could be translated. As a consequence, other cultures were able to preserve their own traditions because now they had a means for writing it down. And that is because Christians went into their world and taught them to read. Throughout history, Christians have been on the forefront of educational advancement. By the 9th century, every monastery in Europe was required to have a hospital and a school within it. They became the urban intellectual centers that taught people things like how to read and basic medical care. Christianity has throughout history been a faith that celebrated knowledge and wisdom. It founded most of the great universities and hospitals, not only in the West, but throughout the world, in Asia and South America and Africa. We are a people of the book, and as a consequence, we celebrate wisdom. Wisdom is the ability to synthesize our experiences of the past in order to make healthy and productive choices in the future. And with Jesus as your foundation, you have every reason to pursue wisdom. Without Jesus, wisdom and knowledge become tools in the hands of the powerful to be used for their own advantage. The only wisdom you have is the will of the majority. It requires a foundation outside of ourselves to undergird the intellectual virtues that we celebrate or even just take for granted in our culture. Finally, look at the foundation of good relationships that we find in Jesus. The foundation of good relationships is love. Without Jesus, love is just emotional froth brought about through an evolutionary process to make us reproduce, and that's all it is. But look at the kind of love that Jesus teaches in the Sermon on the Mount. Not only love your friends and neighbors and treat them gracefully, and don't even hold on to anger towards them, and don't call them bad names, and don't treat them like objects, but love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. Bless the one who sued you. Bless the one who stole from you. Bless the one who made you walk a mile. Bless those who have no reason to expect any grace from you. In the kingdom of Jesus, you see an ethic that doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. No other philosophy or religion contains teachings like this. Buddhism, even in its focus on compassion, doesn't come close to this. Hinduism and Islam are even farther away. Jesus teaches a radical ethic of love that is unknown anywhere else in the world because it is an otherworldly teaching. It's either God or it's garbage. It doesn't make any sense in a secular world. The primary reason that the faith of Jesus has spread throughout the world and is the largest practiced religion in the world today is love. We are made for love. We need love to survive. A child cannot grow up without love. Love makes us mentally healthy. Love is at the heart of who we are and all that we want out of life. The largest longitudinal study on happiness in the world is going on at Harvard right now. It's been going on for 80 years. And they have determined that the primary factor in whether or not we are happy is loving relationships. And they don't have to be romantic, and you don't have to have a lot of them. You just have to have a few people with whom you share love. And with Jesus, love makes sense. God is a being of love who created us in his own image. And so we are beings of love. Without God, love is emotional froth on the waves of evolutionary processes that are ultimately meaningless. So in the end, this is how we shall conclude our series on the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus' teachings like the Sermon on the Mount, undergird our moral instincts, the morals that we crave. The intellectual foundations of a developed society and wisdom, and healthy relationships, loving relationships, are undergirded by the life and teachings of Jesus, sure as steel posts holding up an earthquake-reinforced building. If you want to live life right, if you want to be prepared for the next pandemic or disaster or tragedy, build your house on the rock. Build your life on the life and teachings of Jesus. Put your life in His hands and surrender your competition and control for this world. Take hold fully of the kingdom of heaven and don't live for anything else. We have now, in the Sermon on the Mount, the constitution for the kingdom to which Jesus.
Thank you, Pastor Jim, and thank you guys so much for joining us online.
It's been a great day. We are praying for you and cheering for you. If there's any way we can ever support you, go ahead and send us an email, info@reallife.la. We'd love to know how we can partner with you as you take next steps in your faith. Have a great week. We'll see you next time.